Thank you for listening to the Kyle and Tim podcast, where we have authentic conversations that help cultivate a better understanding of ourselves, our guests, and the world we live in. This podcast is about our guests, getting to know them, their backgrounds, experience, thoughts, and ideas. We really appreciate you listening. Before we introduce our next guest, we'd like to introduce you to a few sponsors that help make this podcast possible. Today's podcast is brought to you by Mountain Mule Transportation, located here in Bozeman, Montana. Mountain Mule is a private SUV and truck service, offering chauffeur services in all of southwest Montana. Whether it's your next skiing, hunting, or fishing trip, early morning or late night trips to and from Bozeman Airport, as well as weddings and private parties. No matter the occasion, Mountain Mule will get you there safely and on time. To learn more, visit mountain-mule.com and book today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Kyle and Tim podcast. In this podcast, we interview me, Kyle Conrad. In this podcast, we talk about what I learned in 2024. We've been doing the podcast for about a year now. And so we talk about getting a studio, stepping up our game with our equipment. We talk about what I learned from interviewing guests and how that's come out in my personal life or my professional life. So hope you enjoy it. And we're looking forward to the Kyle and Tim podcast in 2025. We're going to be reaching out to a whole bunch of new folks in 2025. We're going to get some new equipment. And we're going to level up our game. So look forward to what's to come. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as we talked about on the podcast, if you're interested in doing our podcast or you know anyone who might be interested, please reach out to us and we'd love to have you on, most likely.
You can email us at
do we even know the email?
kyleandtimpodcast@gmail.com.
We'll regrettably put this email in the link. But yeah, Instagram, email, let us know. Enjoy, folks.
Thanks.
Kyle Conrad.
Tim E. Baldwin.
What's going on, man?
It's cracking.
Wouldn't be the first time I edited out my middle name. You'll never know.
So I said E because I know you didn't
know.
want to say
All
the
right,
full
man.
name.
It's New Year's. We've been doing this podcast for a year. What have you learned? What have you learned from this podcast about people, about yourself, and the general experience?
I guess I'll just start with observations. Some people are really excited to do one, and other people are not interested. I find that interesting because there are some people that I think are really outgoing. I would say like socially they have a lot of friends. And you would expect them that, oh, okay, like they'll go on the podcast. They'll want to kind of talk about their background or their stories or their experiences. And we found that some of those people are not interested in doing that. So I just find that's kind of an observation that's interesting. Some of these folks who are so outgoing are just not comfortable going on a podcast, which I find that interesting. Now I will contradict that observation with another one, or I guess maybe not another one, but I also understand why people are hesitant to go on a podcast. You and I were pretty afraid to do it. So I understand that people are reluctant. You do have to be vulnerable, like to put yourself out there. So that's an observation.
A guest that we just had on told me, I was just talking to him 2 nights ago, and he said, "Man, I was nervous." And I said to him, "I get it, man. Do you remember how you felt when we started doing it? So the first guest we ever had was my mother.
Mm-hmm.
We started doing it, just me and you, just riffed for a while, and then we first formally had a guest. Do you remember how you felt then? What your kind of dialogue was or your emotions?"
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit of nervousness with the first few guests. But I think because we were interviewing other people, it was easier on us. If you had interviewed me or I had interviewed you the first few, I think I would have been way more nervous. So we almost kind of like circumvented that by interviewing other people. So the focus wasn't on us. Yeah, I would say I don't know why it is. I would say I was a little nervous to like post things. Like when we first posted, I was like, oh fuck. But that quickly went away. We were like, then we were just, that's normal.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't know if you've listened to it in your car or at your house on your TV, but when you see it come up on the TV or on your display in your car,
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of weird.
It is kind of weird. Other things I've learned that everybody has a really interesting story. You just have to like let them tell it, or you have to get it out of them. And that's kind of an art that we're much better at, but I think we have a long way to go to kind of getting the most out of the guests and making them feel comfortable and asking people the right questions and reading people. But I would say that everybody has a really interesting story. They have a very interesting life. And when you ask them about what they think, what they thought, what they experienced, I think you just find it really interesting, and you learn a lot about people, learn a lot about yourself in the process. So I think I found commonality that was partly missing in my life of like, sometimes I feel like I can't relate to people, and the podcast has helped a lot in feeling like, oh yeah, I'm sitting across the table. Like that's me.
Have you noticed sort of, I guess, have you noticed any ways you show up differently in the rest of your life outside the podcast? Is there any way you can relate that to doing this where you said, oh, I now talk with people different. I now approach things different. I now have conversations differently or show up differently when I meet people. Have you just noticed any of this sort of start to express itself in your general life outside of this?
Yeah.
Could you give
No,
us
that's it.
Could you give us an example?
I would say it's just easier to start a conversation with anybody. So now I think it's easier to just talk with anybody about any topic. That's one thing. I find it easier to, I would call that almost like an introduction or an icebreaker. It's easier to introduce myself to people, especially people that I don't know or I've never spoke to before. And recently I've been reaching out to people. I would say in the last 4 or 5 months, I've been reaching out to people that I don't know to connect with them from a business standpoint, and now to connect with them from a, podcasting standpoint, to try to get guests on. And that was scary. It used to be scary, and now I'm like, dude, this is so easy. So I have a lot less fear of rejection, I guess. And I would say, when I say rejection, I mean like if they don't respond, it's okay. Like I'm going to reach out to somebody else, And so, so that's nice to not have that fear. So I think that's part of it, and I think that's like building our endurance of our vulnerability. We're being vulnerable every week, and we're asking other people to be vulnerable every week. And so now it's just kind of become normal. Where before it was like, I don't even know, like maybe that would have been, we would do something like that, like only a handful of times a year. And now it's like, well, it's 52 times a week. 52 times a year. So we're doing it all the time.
Yeah, and that's only the number of people that actually sit down with us. There's the number of people we ask to do it.
That's right.
And that
That's
could
right.
be 200.
Yeah.
Or, whatever.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that more. I thought about it with my mom and dad here this week. Tangent. This is a tangent, but related. Everybody has like a level of endurance, and they have certain things that they have a super high level of endurance. It could be endurance, or you could say that it's stamina, or what have you. And so, like, my dad has a super high level of stamina and endurance, with like fixing things and working on things because he's done it forever. And so, something that might take me a week to work on because it's my first time or second time ever doing it. He can like just knock it out because I get discouraged or whatever. So I was thinking about that with like, that really is vulnerability is really, it's something that you can gain a lot more endurance and stamina with. And all of a sudden it just becomes normal and you're just constantly vulnerable. And it used to really bother me. So the podcast has done that for me.
Yeah, I used to think it was a bad thing. I guess that it wasn't as masculine to be vulnerable. And then I now literally look at that the exact opposite. That one of the most masculine, quote unquote, masculine or manly things you can do is be vulnerable because you're essentially showing, when you're showing yourself, you're very open to all the criticism of it. But that takes bravery and courage. You're sort of hiding behind something if you're not vulnerable because you're hiding because you don't want to show yourself because then you're open to criticism and the exposure. That Jordan Peterson, I just was listening to him yesterday. He was saying you don't get braver, or it doesn't get easier. You get braver. So it doesn't, like, if something's a fear, it doesn't.
You mean if you move forward with it?
You just become braver. The fear doesn't diminish. It's the same fear, and the same people will experience that fear.
Yeah, like if the weight doesn't get heavier, you just get stronger.
Yeah, or the weight doesn't get lighter.
Yeah, or heavier. Yeah. Either way, like the weight's the same, right? It's a 25-pound dumbbell. You just like, it went from, hey, this is kind of heavy, to, oh, this is easy.
Yeah. Those are the type of analogies that speak to our audience. All right, man. So, yeah, what's a good example? I guess that was a good example of just reaching out to people. How about but outside of this, like in your work life or in your dating life or your family life or your friend group life? How is this? Have you noticed anything different?
Yeah, I mean, the dating life thing, it would be interesting if I wasn't dating somebody right now, but I have a hunch that I would probably have a lot more success out in the dating world because I'm more comfortable being vulnerable, and so like I would just probably ask more women out on dates. So in hindsight, we should have started this podcast like 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Hey, do you remember the conversations or any of the conversations me and you had around starting a podcast?
A little bit, but remind me, like.
Well, do you remember the Chris Williamson bit?
Yeah, about the one we did on the way to Missoula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole concept was if you record yourself speaking, you'll listen back, and then you'll notice things, and you'll clean it up just almost unconsciously. You'll start to be more aware of the way you speak and the way you show up. But anyway, like, do you remember just why we spent our money and time doing this?
I mean, a couple of reasons. I think we wanted to articulate what was in our heads, and I'll speak for myself. I've had a hard time doing that, and that's caused frustration in my life, in all really, my whole family, friends, relationships, work. If you can't express yourself, it's frustrating. And so I was literally thinking about that yesterday. Like I was super frustrated yesterday, and halfway through the day, I was like, "Oh, I know why." Because all this, I was like bottling things up for a few days, and didn't know how to articulate them. And then I was like, "Oh, okay, got it." Like now, I had to just kind of organize my thoughts. So I think speaking and writing do that. They do that differently. So I think one of them was we wanted to articulate our thoughts. Another one was probably question our thoughts and beliefs. One of the things that I haven't listened to the most recent handful of podcasts. I need to go back and do that. And I normally, we can talk about that. I normally listen to like 10 or 15 minutes of them, and then I just move on. I don't know if that's a good strategy or not, but what I've found in listening to them is, especially ones from like 8, 9, 10 months ago, I don't even remember saying some of those things. And I'm like, what the fuck was I saying? Like, what? That's not even a logical thought. So that's interesting. You're like, I was there. I'm in the video. I'm talking, but I don't necessarily think the same way. And so I wonder why. Sometimes I'm like, well, I wonder what I was thinking at the time when that I said what I said. So that's an interesting output of the podcast, to question your thoughts and your beliefs.
So what is it? I mean, how do you think it shows the way you show up for other people?
Does changes in the podcast
or just noticing that about yourself? If you could notice 10 months ago, you don't remember saying that, and you don't remember why you were thinking that. So I'm saying when you talk to somebody, whether it's tomorrow, yesterday, or do you think, oh, maybe this person's just in a different space? Maybe I'm seeing this tiniest percentile of their personality and it's being expressed because of XYZ. I guess I'm essentially asking, has it changed the way you have empathy for other people?
I don't have any empathy.
I think that's pretty apparent. If you're a frequent listener, I think we see a kind of a natural sort of trend in your empathy.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what I was thinking about when you were saying that. Like, I guess I'm probably less judgmental, because everything's like at least with the way I think about it right now, is everything's like a moment in time. Like, what happened with that person this week, that hour, that day, and what's going through their mind at that moment. Now you could, like, we had this conversation with your mom. We asked her the same question, basically a year apart, and we were joking around with her that, like, we're going to check her answer. Well, she had a different answer because it was 12 months later, right? And so I think that context matters. Did somebody have a bad week? Did something negative happen in their life that week? Are they scared about something, right? Or the complete opposite. Are they overly confident about something that maybe they shouldn't be, right? But you might get two completely different answers just based on what's going on in their life. So I would say I judge people differently, knowing that their responses can change. And it makes sense that their responses would change.
Yeah, I guess over time, there's sort of patterns or tendencies with everyone. But then inside all those moments, we will show up sort of in different ways but there's probably like general overarching personality themes. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there's a number of times you should interact with somebody, or like you give somebody a chance to say like, oh, nope, that person's an asshole every time, or hey, that person's actually, they've been great, but so I don't know. But I mean, I don't know. They say we make a bunch of unconscious judgments about people within the first 5 seconds. But I wonder how many times, I'm sure there's some mathematicians and scientists have figured out the amount of times like you should really give to a person, or days, to sort of have a more general idea of what type of person they are.
Yeah, so I would say I'm less judgmental. And that has to go with like, I think it goes hand in hand with, I feel more connected to people than I did a year ago. And I mean, if you think about the people that we've had on, people come from all walks of life. And I think that's really cool and really interesting. And I feel kind of more connected to all of them.
Yeah, I've said that to you. I felt every person we've talked to, I felt just a strong and different connection of you feel more like there's a human bond that you start to sort of uncover. And you're like, oh shit, oh yeah, I get you. You're like me in a different light.
Yeah, or you could see how you would do or act or be the way they are after you understand their circumstances.
I was just laughing when I was thinking of how many episodes we did, and I told you a few weeks ago, was there something going on with you? You seemed a little off the last couple of weeks, and I was saying that I said to my girlfriend, I've spent like at least 80 hours just doing podcasts with this guy, and that doesn't count all the other time we've spent together. So I'm pretty sure I can tell something feels different, which is just, I was thinking that because when you spend a couple hours sitting with somebody and talking to them, you get to know somebody. I don't know. Is there any time, I guess I'll make this a question. Is there a time outside of this in the past before this, or that you generally would sit down with somebody, whether they're a family member or it's the first time you've met them, for 2 to 3 hours and have a conversation, ask them what their life is like, and generally just try to listen?
Nope. Maybe I've done it twice before in my life. But no.
Yeah, me either. It just seems weird, right? Like, not weird, but does not seem normal, or doesn't seem like it's not a lesson that I've had people tell me I should do. You should just go talk to people for a few hours and see what's going on.
Yeah, nope, I've never done it.
Is there anything you've noticed about yourself or the way you show up that you want to change, that you haven't yet, or you're working towards improving?
Yeah, I mean, I think my
leave your comments in the YouTube section below.
Yeah, I'll take any and all criticisms or suggestions.
Don't hold back, fans. I'm counting on you.
I won't fucking read the comments.
I'll send them to him. Comment.
Yeah, I this will probably never end, but
people are kind of thinking that about this podcast, and they might have just turned it off.
I would like to strengthen my vulnerability stamina. And I want to be able to like catch myself when I would say, in a weak moment. And I say a weak moment, that means not understanding and evaluating the situation in real time properly. And so instead of like getting frustrated, getting angry, getting sad, whatever it is, understanding that like, yes, those emotions are real and I should pay attention to them, but trying to like snap out of that in the moment as quickly as possible and handle the situation properly. So that's something that I've recently thought about. So that's one. What was the question?
Is there essentially anything you want to, like, you've noticed that you do that you want to improve upon?
Yeah, that's it. That's one of them, is like in the moment, react, respond accordingly.
I wonder if this would work.
So sorry, what comes to mind is this book called The Power of Now. And everything is happening now. We always think about the future, we think about the past, but it's all right now. Everything's happening right now. And so it's like, you don't have, I guess it's kind of stupid to think like, oh, well, I'm going to fix this tomorrow or next week or in a month. It's like, fix it right now, right? Have the conversation right now. You want to have an uncomfortable conversation with your significant other, family member, like have it now. And I get it. There's timing is important. And so you may not be able to have it right now, but like maybe tomorrow. Don't put it off. It can be those things, and sometimes it's with your boss, and you're like, well, I'll tell them next week, or I'll see how this goes over the next quarter. See if like this gets. It's like, just be honest right now, and that has to do with vulnerability, because it's hard to be honest, and it's hard to say like, hey, I'm fucking pissed off and upset about this thing. And then it's really hard to actually articulate that properly. And maybe you are mad or upset or sad about something. And so it's almost like, all right, understand your emotions, understand where they're coming from, articulate them, and do all that in a time frame that for me is faster, because I tend to like take a long time to understand my emotions and then be able to articulate it. And then once I can be able to articulate it, well, then like life has moved on, and like it's not even a problem anymore, or it doesn't make sense to bring something up that happened weeks ago. And so I'm trying to like compress all of that into like real time, so that I don't have a problem in 2 more weeks. Like I want to handle it now.
I wonder if this would help. I was just thinking this. I thought of it for yourself and for me. So I say like too much, in my opinion, when I'm speaking. You say a lot. So I was just listening to a podcast, and this guy was saying every time this was one of his life hacks for 2024. Every time somebody annoys him, or like somebody's rude with him, he turned it into a trigger to be grateful. So every time he feels like, fuck, that person's annoying me, or why is this taking so long? He's like, now's the time I need to be grateful. So I just thought in my head, maybe every time I say like, and I thought for you, every time you say is it a reminder to like trigger yourself to be present and then think about what you're dealing with? I don't know if it, but I thought it was a great idea to make some sort of association with something you do.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have to, you're going to have to be pretty aware to catch yourself.
Yep.
Otherwise, just unconsciously, I say it so many times and don't notice it because it's so unconscious. So I just wonder if it would help you, or help you essentially like catch yourself when you're not doing what you were essentially saying, of addressing something right away. Just kind of to, snap, like create a trigger. So, I don't know. They say, addicts have triggers.
So what would I do?
Well, I mean, essentially what you said is you want to sort of deal with things in the moment and be more vulnerable and just deal with them. So if there's something going on, you say, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, well, fuck, I just said, like it's good. You know what I mean? It'd bring you right back to like, what's that thing I'm going to do when I say, oh yeah, I'm going to deal with shit right now. And then you'll kind of like, I imagine it would almost change your physiology. You'd kind of be shit. What's that? Like, think of it as just like a nagging to-do list.
So years ago, this was like 2016. 2016, what I would do is, this is like similar. Every time I had a negative thought or said something out loud that was actually, it was every time I said something out loud that was negative, I had to switch my wristband to my other one.
That's funny.
Okay. So this went on for, I would do it like 10 times a day. Or I would do it like 10 times a day. And so I had to switch the wristband. You have to go 21 days without saying something out loud negative. Shit, I said again. And so it made a huge impact on my life in a positive way. No, I guess pun intended, but it was all about positivity. And at the time I was in a super negative place. So that was helpful. So yeah, I should do something like that.
What I thought you were going to say, which I think would be funny, is I thought you were going to say every time you say something negative, you snap it on your wrist. Because that'd be fucking annoying, especially if you did it hard.
Yeah, well, the idea is that you hold, so it has to be on the one wrist for 21 days in a row.
I see.
So, and if you break, so let's just say you get through a week, right? And then
you should probably start doing this again.
Yeah. And then you get through a week, and then on the 8th day, you say something negative out loud, you start over. So it took me a while, but I picked it up really quickly, and it was super positive.
That's smart. That's just a good idea to kind of put something together, something physical to bring you back to the moment. Say, what am I doing? If I really am focused and thinking about it, I won't just try to fill every void of sound with words and say like and well, and just kind of sit in the discomfort. Then I'll think of the words before they all come out, and then I won't say like, but I realize it honestly takes a lot of awareness. So I honestly think making some sort of trigger would really change that. That was the hardest one. I just said I was going to say make some sort of trigger, like that was, and I didn't even know what to say. I didn't know how to finish that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah, man. So it's a new year, so there's big expectations now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else?
What else have I learned about doing a podcast? I mean, we could just go through like the mechanics of it. I just said again.
Snap.
As an example, getting the studio and getting it set up was pretty hard. I did it again.
Son of a bitch.
I did it again. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I mean, we've made pretty big steps in the last 6 months or so. We got this in June.
Yeah, we've it's been at least 5 or 6 months because we did a 4-month lease and then we renewed for another 6. We've almost committed to a year collectively with 2 leases.
Yeah, so setting up the room.
Yeah, me and Kyle are both in our 30s and we're not married. You'll start to see a pattern here.
Setting up the room, getting the right equipment, which is an evolution, and we're going to get more equipment and better equipment, but this was a good start. I'm glad I think we've got our money's worth out of this equipment so far. So we'll just keep changing things.
To anyone who's had issues with the skipping or the sound, I don't know, what would you call it? Like little choppy.
I don't know what to call it. Yeah, it's like almost like a
it's like a tick or a chop or something. A, thank you for the feedback because we can't fix anything if we don't know, and B, we've ordered some new equipment, so we're hopefully this episode won't have any of that. We will see, and we're gonna keep. We wanted to make everyone better, so anyway, back to the equipment.
Yeah, so I think we're done pretty good with everything else that's going on in our lives. You know, if this was full time, then we could probably condense all of these like things that we learned in like a month, right? Like, so, I would say that's something that we both learned on the fly. Like, we don't know how to do this stuff. I would also say that any time you learn something new, it's hard. It's hard to learn things that are new. And I'm watching it with like my nephews. They get so mad and so frustrated. And I'm like, yeah, like, duh. Like, that's what happens when you're an adult, when you try to learn something new. And I think it goes back to that vulnerability to be like, hey, I suck at this. And I'm not going to be good at it for a while. And when I say a while, I mean like years. And so learning new things is hard. And we've been learning how to do this. I'm glad in a sense that I think we're taking it appropriately seriously. Like, it's not our main thing. It's clearly not our main thing. But we are trying to like make improvements. So for me, it's kind of like the right balance. I feel like if we were harder on ourselves, I would get more discouraged and I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, it can. It's a tough balance because this is one of the easiest and most fun things that I've done, but it also we to some extent set some sort of standards for ourselves and how often we would do it, and it's a commitment. And yeah, there's the balance between it not just driving us crazy, but not what's the point in doing it if we're totally just half-assing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I would say like the operations and mechanics of it. We've learned a lot, by doing that. We have a lot to learn. Like, we still don't know why we had that buzzing.
That comes and goes.
It comes and goes, and
it's gone.
It's
right
really
now.
weird that like it was gone for months, and all of a sudden just came back, and then now it's gone again. We don't know why.
We have a haunted podcast studio.
Yeah.
I have a very strong suspicion, just speaking practically, that the more chords and connections you have, the more.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
You just have more failure connection points of connection and more failure points.
It's kind of like if you needed to talk to me, but you had to go through 5 people to get a message to me, or if you could just call me directly. So
right.
like the direct lines is going to be the most clear communication. Everything can kind of be lost in translation, for lack of a better technical definition.
Mm-hmm.
What's the funniest or most amusing thing you've learned, or like in a particular episode, or just as a whole in general?
I don't know. Nothing. The most amusing thing.
Well, I feel like I don't want to answer your question for you, but you almost alluded to it in the beginning about the people that will do it and the people that won't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's like amusing is the right way, but it's peculiar or interesting.
Yeah. I was thinking like more of like a funny moment that we've had. That's what I was thinking about amusing.
Yeah. Leave comments in the YouTube.
I mean, one of the most fun podcasts we had was with Rick because we were drinking beer and we were just joking the entire time. So that one comes to mind.
And that was so early. That was like episode 5.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Rickleback's coming back.
Rickleback. So that was fun. We should do that again.
Okay, I got a question for you. What have you learned about your co-host since doing this podcast?
What have I learned about you? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say anything that's come out of like. I think I've watched you kind of change, and I like that. I think in hindsight, like it's expected. Yeah, I think you are way more comfortable talking to people than you used to be. You know, in social settings outside of the podcast studio, like I think before you just kind of kept to yourself and were quiet, and now I think you seem to be way more outgoing.
Yeah, I could touch on that in a later interview.
Okay.
So do you have any personal, we should probably like collectively, which we've talked about, but sit down and come up with our sort of aspirations or
For 2025
goals for this podcast. But do you have anything that you want to, I guess, personally get out of it or achieve or just do as a whole with the podcast, or anything you'd like to improve upon?
Yeah, I think we should improve upon the audio visuals throughout the year. I don't have a specific. Yeah, I guess I'll just say the things that are on top of my mind. We should get 2 new cameras, so we have kind of multiple camera angles at all times. We're gonna get a new mixer, so that should help kind of some of the audio.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably end up getting new mics this year too. Just buy some better mics, and so I don't know that that's an immediate need, but I would say let's just say by April. Like by April, we have new cameras and a mixer and potentially new mics. So that's some goals I have for the podcast. Probably get a new rug. You guys can't see it, but it's pretty dirty. So we'll get a new rug, some new plants I ordered. Something that I got excited about in the last week or so was I started reaching out to what seemed like random people. They're not random. They're not random because some of these people who I know or know through somebody else. But I'm going to reach out to all kinds of people this year. And it goes back to that vulnerability thing of like, I'm just going to fucking ask somebody. If they want to be on the podcast, great. I'd love to meet them and interested in understanding who they are and their background, their experiences, learn about their business or what have you. If they don't respond, that's okay. It doesn't really matter. No sweat off our back. So I'm looking forward to doing that because I think that vulnerability of asking people to be on our podcast and really just asking to meet them, right? And they don't even have to be on the podcast. I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to meet us first, which is great. And maybe they never come on the podcast. We at least get to meet them. So I'm looking forward to that. I wonder where that will take us. When I say take us, I mean, isn't that really what life is all about in a sense of you meet people who introduce you to other people who introduce you to other people. And ideally, you just keep having better experiences. And so that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you meet enough people, you're really going to meet some people that you resonate with and kind of just sort of see and pursue and enjoy life the way you do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's only through like, it's kind of like it's a numbers game. And it's if you just kind of stay confined to your small group of friends in your small area, that's fine. And if you like that, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have any type of curiosity, it's just, I don't know. I first learned it when I got into the business that I now own and operate, when you just talk to people, how interesting conversations can be and where they can take you.
Yeah. In the last couple of years, I have changed a thought. The podcast has helped with this. I've changed the idea that I had about networking. Like, I always thought that was like a sleazy word and a salesy word. And I thought that it was disingenuous. People are like, oh, I'm doing networking. Like, I'm trying to find my next business deal. And so years ago, I used to kind of think that that was a negative thing. I don't think that anymore. Probably quite the contrary. I think that simply meeting somebody, and being genuine about whatever your goals are, there's nothing wrong with that. And if your goals are simply to make money, and if you're genuine about that and upfront and forthright about that, great. Find a connection. That person connects you to somebody else, and boom, off to the races. You're doing business together. Great. There's nothing wrong with that. Those aren't my goals for the podcast. My goals for the podcast are, let's meet as many awesome people as we can. They're going to share some cool stories and experiences with us. Fucking sweet.
What do you, yeah, and I don't, if you don't like have anything specific, because this would take a lot of thought, and but is there anything specific that sticks out that you just was very interesting for you to learn, or surprising about any of the guests, or anything in general that of anyone we've talked to in 40 plus episodes?
I mean, there's parts of all of the podcasts that I found really interesting. It's hard to say because I feel like we'd have to spend more time with those people on an individual basis and almost like dive in and then dive in again and then dive in again to really find out like what makes somebody tick or what makes them think that way. So that's a little hard to say. I would say one of the most useful, what comes to mind is our podcast with Greg. His strategy of kind of like figuring out what was wrong in his life or what was bothering him was so smart. He thinks about it in 4 categories. His life is like, in his life, is his family bothering him? Like, is it his kids, or is something going on with his kids and his wife? Is it his relationships with his wife? Right, that was one category, and then was it his friends, or was it work? And so he identifies like which one is bothering, or I'm sorry, and the other one was himself. And so it's like, which one is bothering him? Is something with himself bothering him? Work, wife, family. And so
was it like physical, mental health, maybe, or no?
He didn't mention that.
Yeah.
He just said, was it him? Yeah. So either way, I was like, man, that's such a great way to identify like what's bothering me. Because sometimes we just convolute all these things. Anyway, so that's one thing that comes to mind. I don't really remember exactly what your question was.
Just something that you've learned that's I guess been very interesting or surprising to you.
That, I would say that was interesting. Another one was, I would just say like, we talked quite a bit with Foster. He seems like he's such a person that has like so many things together, right? And we mentioned that to him, and but he doesn't feel that way. Like he feels like, oh, he's working on shit constantly. So that was an interesting thing I just picked up of, like, you never really feel like you got it all dialed or what have you, or you're so well put together, which is a good lesson, just to be like, hey, look, you just keep trying and keep going for it. And yeah, so that was one. Our podcast with Bailey was another one about how she kind of what was it? I just drew a blank. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, one that, like, the thing with the values was something.
Values, that's what it was. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, it was the how she kind of identifies what her values are. That was a good one.
I don't know if you've noticed this, but I was just thinking this because we just did another episode with Mike. When we've done a second episode with somebody, there's a new level of comfort that makes it very fun.
Yeah.
Because naturally, anything you've never done before, there's that nervousness. But when anyone's come back to a second one, they're like, there's just that, like, there's that rapport with
they
the
trust
three of
us.
Yeah, it's fun. And it's like, we can go anywhere. And the first one is definitely, like you said, you have to start somewhere, and it's actually pretty fun when you barely know the person, or that's when you're getting to know them. But then I'm generally excited to see somebody that we did a podcast with. If I know they're going to be somewhere, I'm like, hell yeah, like, what's up, man? And then we can just go anywhere from there because we have that, like, oh yeah, we got a vibe. Like, I don't know, Brian said, I really like the quote or the statement, martial arts is the most intimate thing you'll ever do outside of intimacy. But there's a level of intimacy to this that gives you a connection to people that you would otherwise really never get.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I'm going to reach out to a bunch of people this year and see who wants to come on the podcast, and they're going to feel like it's so random. Like, they're going to be like, who the fuck, first off, who's this guy? Second off, what is this podcast? And it'd be interesting to see, like, who says yes, will come on.
Okay, I got 3 things in my head. One of them I'll talk to you when we're done, so remind me. But 2, this is what I wanted to ask you before. So you were saying when you reach out to these people, so, like, you felt uncomfortable, felt weird just saying, hey, and now you essentially, you're like, fuck it, I'll ask whoever. I'm just going to find out if you want to do the podcast. It's fun. We'll get to know each other. What do you think?
Well, I also, like, I phrased it to these people that, like, that there's an opportunity just to meet us. So they don't have to come on the podcast. Right. So, like, they don't have to do anything, right? Because the point is to meet the people. If they don't want to be on the podcast, that's okay. But it'd be great to go to lunch with them, or go to dinner with them, or have a beer with them, or a cup of coffee, whatever.
Like, this probably will sound weird, but I will just say this. If somebody sent me that email, I would be excited.
Yeah. So I think some people are going to be very excited, and we'd love to have you on. And if you go back and listen to our podcast, you're going to find out that like there's no agenda here. We're not going to try to back you into a corner. You know, it's like this isn't CNN or Fox. It's like we're just trying to meet new people and learn from those people. So, but if you don't want to come on, don't come on. But please have a cup of coffee with us.
And if you do, please directly just send us an email or message us on Instagram and say,
Right.
hey, I would love to do your podcast. We would love to. I was going to ask, or trying to ask as we got sidetracked, what do you think was going through your head when you had all these reservations, and what do you think now goes through your head? I mean, like, has your focus just changed on because obviously if there were some reservations.
So part of me was like thinking like, oh, well, we have to have a well-established podcast to reach out to people to be able to want to come on our show, right? And show, you know, what are we going to call it? I guess it is a show. And I was like, oh, well, we're not well established enough. So it was like, that was a restriction I was putting on us to say, hey, we have to have our shit together to some, I don't know, make believe point before we can start asking people that we don't know. And I was like, well, that, like, when are we going to be at that point? Where is that point? And so that just doesn't make any sense. And so it's like, goes back to kind of what I was talking about earlier about trying to right size my decisions and balance that with my vulnerability all at the same time, which is like, just do it now, right? Like, handle the situation now, and just see where it ends up. And so, like, ask people now. If they want to come on, great. If they don't, we're going to ask somebody else. And there's no hard feelings, right? If somebody doesn't want to come on the show, fine. Or if they don't want to meet us, that's okay. Hopefully, maybe a year later, or 2 years, or 5 years later, they're going to want to meet us. Cool. Then meet us then. So I think that was kind of, I was reluctant about that, and now I'm not.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, I want to learn something about somebody else. And I want to learn something about their business or their hobby or whatever the hell they're good at. That's it. Or, you know, like this guy that I reached out to at the Melt House, right? Like, he's starting a new business in Bozeman. It hasn't opened yet. You and I like cold plunges. We like health and fitness. Boom. Like, fucking sweet. I want to see what this guy's up to. It sounds freaking awesome. I can't wait till they open.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Probably a good thing for us both to remember is, in our experience of asking just general acquaintances and people we know, some of the most likely people to say yes have, and some of the people that we thought would say yes have said no, and it's essentially nothing personal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just there's too many reasons to even count on why they might not want to do it, and it's nothing personal.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just a good school of thought for all rejection in general. Because it's generally that person. Maybe it's you. Like, if you're, depending on how you're showing up, if you're like being a complete, I don't know, loon about it, but it's most likely not you. Or maybe, anyway, just an observation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you want to know?
Well, and I also think that's worthless to think about.
Yeah.
To an extent, right? Like, unless you really are being like an asshole or something. Like,
yeah, I mean, maybe
like it's worthless to think about why is somebody saying no. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in their life.
Yeah. If you're getting reoccurring no's from everyone, maybe ask for some feedback. Maybe if you haven't showered in a while. And, you know, I'm just saying, that's like within reason. It's generally, it doesn't have anything to do with you.
I got one for you. I gotta tell the crowd. Can I tell everybody? You're the moderator.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. There's been a handful of podcasts that we drank alcohol.
Alcoholic alcohol.
It is so interesting how different I am after just a few beers. Like, my questions are different. My character is different. I'm an idiot. And so that's like an interesting thing to watch. And I'm like, oh man, like, wow, I'm a very different person with just really 2 drinks.
Would or could you also say that some great ideas and experiences also come from alcohol?
Yeah, but mostly not.
What?
Yes, they do. They do. I guess what I'm saying is I would, yeah, my thoughts are significantly different, and the things that come out of my mouth are way different than when I'm sober. And that's just an interesting observation. And when you can make that observation when you record yourself. You can't do that in real time, really. Especially when you're drinking alcohol. You can't. It's very difficult to observe yourself and say, huh, like, where did that thought come from? And you can't really do that. Or I have a really hard time doing that. When I watch it on the podcast, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I would say your delusion rises in parallel with your assumed intelligence.
Yeah.
But when you're sober watching it back, you're on a different plane, and anyone who's dealt with somebody drunk when they're sober,
yeah,
you should know how you sound.
Yeah.
That's a great observation and point. The last thing I had thought of was when I said, when have you ever sat down with somebody? Do you remember when we did speed dating?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I generally had a good experience.
I did too.
And that, like, 99% of the women were out of the range that I was going to date. But it was I was thinking essentially, wow, I otherwise would never have sat down with these women.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting to see where they're coming from. And what was it, 2 minutes you got, or 5 minutes? It wasn't much.
Yeah, somewhere between 2 and 5. Maybe it was 3, 4. Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, I was wondering how.
That's all you need.
Yeah, it's almost too much. I was wondering how long that was from when we did that to when we did our first podcast.
Timing wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We have to go back and
look.
Yeah,
we could figure it out. But anyway. All right, man. I mean, that's about all I got for questions for you from a year of podcasting. But you got anything else you want to put out there into the Declaration of Intelligence? Release it into the Oracle? Any statements? Any New Year's resolutions? I prefer New Year's goals. I don't know, because a resolution just has a kind of...
For the podcast?
For yourself, for the podcast, for all the above. The greater good of...
Yeah, I'm still working on my goals list. I put together a list of goals for 2025. I'm nearly complete, but I'm not ready to put that out. I think I need to kind of reorganize them and make sure that they're in the right order and that they're the most important things that I want to work on in 2025. Right now, they're kind of a little bit of a mess. I think for the podcast, man, we just, I'm looking forward to reaching out to a whole bunch of people this year. So excited about that. And like we talked about, we're going to get some new equipment. We're going to level up our game, and I'm looking forward to that. I think we'll get a lot more organized.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be from what's going on with your business and what I'm doing with work. Like we're going to have to get a lot more organized. That's a good thing.
Which is good. Yeah.
Because we're just kind of we've been winging it.
No, but we've been, I think we've been doing really good with where we're at, and we're going to be at a different spot. So we're going to have to we're going to have to meet that level with the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got it.
Yeah. It'll be better no matter what.
Kyle Conrad.
Cool. Thanks. Peace out. Happy 2024.